It being 7:01, I'm calling the November 6th meeting of the Clinton Board of Selectmen to order. First item on our agenda is public comment. Is there any public comment? That would be wonderful.
That would be wonderful.
Are you
a member of the public?
Public commenting?
I love being first up.
Well, it gives you the opportunity to leave.
Yes, thank you.
But you have, that looks like a warm sweater.
It is warm, and I brought my
So
sweatshirt.
you can stay.
Oh, what's on the agenda? Right, if you have a little handout. So Mr. Duval and Mr. Boisno were not on the select board the last time I was here. But I'll be brief because everybody else knows the background, I think. This is intended to be an update for the select board and the town, anybody that's listening.
Thank you.
Thanks. So you want me to sit up here?
Sit right there and tell us your name and address, and the floor is yours.
And why I'm here? To make sure my stuff's on the TV. So I'm Franny Hodge, 16 Harbor Street. I am part of the Clinton Greenway Conservation Trust. I'm here this evening to provide an update on the Clinton Greenway Conservation Trust's progress related to acquiring and developing the Mass Central Rail Trail in Clinton. So I did speak with the select board in the late winter and early spring. Actually, I guess it was still winter because it wasn't, is the March meeting, and it wasn't past the spring date. So for Mr. DeVault and Mr. Boisno, I don't know if you're familiar with where the Mass Central Rail Trail is in Clinton, but the section in Clinton actually runs along the reservoir, and then there's a section that goes between the Rauscher Farm and the Maffei Farm that's still owned by the railroad. So we're trying to acquire this section and develop it into trail. This section along the reservoir is already trail and is the only place on the Wachusett watershed in the Wachusett Reservoir area where you can actually ride bikes. So the way this would actually go, since the trestle bridge is no longer here, would be to go along the base of the dam and then out to Route 70 and then up to where the trail will meet. Unless at some point we're able to put a bridge back. Not part of the initial project.
Or open the top of the dam.
Which is another item that people have suggested quite a bit. It's not something that DCR Watershed is very interested in at the moment, so it would require some engineering evaluation and probably some convincing of them that it keeps the water safe. So probably not the
dam that holds the Quabbin Reservoir, that people can walk across the top of that.
That's correct.
Anytime they want.
That's correct.
Has the water gone bad, I wonder?
No, I don't believe it has. And, you know, as all of us Clintonians know,
So I think that the
we were
guy here
able to-
just has a bug up, as you know what, about I don't want people walking across the dam. I hope he reads that.
Yeah, so I
Put that in the
mean,
paper.
yeah. I think there may be some safety issues they're concerned about, and I think there are potentially ways that those could be addressed with some engineering solutions, such as different kind of fencing or that sort of thing. But certainly their priority is keeping the water safe, and as a community that drinks the water, I appreciate that that's their priority. But it is a suggestion that has come through, and you know, it is something that I think certainly people will continue to consider as we go forward. So related to the section of trail that we're trying to acquire, we have completed a purchase and sale agreement with the railroad. We have until December of 2020 to complete the acquisition, which would give us time to go through a couple grant cycles. The first grant cycle, we applied for funds to get the tunnel inspected. And we were unsuccessful in that grant application for primarily a single reason. The Mass DOT, in conjunction with the Mass Trails Organization, decided to do a feasibility study on this section of the Mass Central Railroad Trail. And I think they felt like they wanted to have the results of that feasibility study before they invested in some of these sections. So they have now completed that feasibility study. They did allow us to participate with having meetings with the provider that did the study, and they are going to review the results with our organization and some of the other organizations that participated in the study prior to releasing it to the general public. The purchase and sale agreement that we completed is basically for $10K per acre. It's about 11 acres in Clinton, so approximately $110,000. We're in the process of reviewing the bids for the Phase 1 environmental site assessment and the tunnel inspection. Because we didn't get the grant for the tunnel inspection, we decided to go with a less complete inspection, so to speak. What we initially planned to do was have basically every inch of the tunnel reviewed and get recommendations for what would need to be done to repair the tunnel to make it appropriate for trail use. Because we didn't get the funding, we're going to do the inspection to confirm the safety and the feasibility for use as trail. They'll do testing in certain spots along the tunnel, but they won't test every piece of it. So it is something we'll probably do a more complete inspection later, but we want to have some idea of the status of the tunnel before we proceed with the acquisition. We also, at the last meeting, I talked to the board about potentially partnering with the town of Clinton on the acquisition. The reason this is really helpful to a small land trust such as ourselves is that the grants are primarily ones that are on a reimbursement basis. So you have to pay for the whatever the project is first, and then you get reimbursed. So if we partner with the town, similar to the project that we did on the Sislick property, the town would assist with the upfront funding for the land, and then we would pay the matching funds. So the town would not be out of pocket, but it would mean that we'd need to go to town meeting and get approval for that kind of a transaction. So related to the, I think I'd reviewed a preliminary budget with you. Oh, I did want to talk about some of the recent activities. So in the spring, I don't know if anybody's been walking on the North Dike, but we painted the milepost on the North Dike. From the North Dike in Clinton, it's 68 miles to Northampton and 36 miles to Boston. And probably most people that walked by that little piece of granite had no idea what it was signifying. And they probably are still somewhat confused, but we are going to put a write-up in the kiosk as well, so people will know that it's it actually was a marker from the railroad from the early 1900s. So we also hosted a panel discussion at our annual meeting to get more of the public sort of involved in the discussion. The communities that neighbor us on the trail participated, so we had people from Wachusett Greenways that's working on the section west of us. We had people from Berlin and Hudson are working on the sections east of us. And then, as I mentioned, the grant application was not successful, but it was primarily related to this feasibility study that the Mass Department of Transportation is completing on this section of the trail. And the sections that they were looking at are the middle sections between Berlin and Belchertown, because there are some sections where there are challenges, such as there's an abandoned railroad tunnel. There are some sections where abutters have required access to the trail, so it isn't available for development as a rail trail. So they were just trying to figure out overall for those large sections what would be a more complete plan for moving forward. Were there any questions?
No, I would just like to say that I attended that annual meeting where this plan was gone over. And, the railroad tunnel is a problem, but, I mean, the Greenway people, the Wachusett Greenway people seem to think that that it was probably all right, the
Yes.
tunnel.
Yeah,
We
so-
have to check, but they thought
Right,
it was probably
exactly.
all right.
And the initial feedback that I got from the company that was doing the feasibility study, because that was one of the things they needed to look at, was they thought the bigger challenges were getting into the tunnel and getting out of the
Right.
tunnel. So they felt like, the tunnel's not going to go anywhere. Much of it is built into granite. So the real challenge is how do you do the trail coming into the tunnel, because it's fairly wet at one end, and then how do you get out of the tunnel and across Route 70.
Right.
So those are things that we intend to address in more detail as
But
we
what
work
I
along.
wanted to say is they felt that if we could get access to the top of the dam so that the rail trail would pass over North Dyke, across the top of the dam, and then through the tunnel, the passage across the top of the dam and through that tunnel would be huge draws.
Yes,
you know.
absolutely.
There'd be really unique features that would draw people. I mean, and it's not something that's going to benefit the town in 3 years, but in 20 years, it could be quite the draw and quite the asset to the town.
I agree. And at previous meetings, we talked about the economic benefits for these kinds of trails, which are quite large. If you look at the Erie Canal Trail, just the trail part of it, not going in the water on the canal, it draws somewhere around 250 million to that section of New York. Now, it's about 3 times as long as this particular trail, but I would take a third of 250 million for the sections along this trail as an economic benefit. Because people come and they spend the night, they eat in restaurants, there'll be more bike rental shops in the areas, lots of other activities that will be a draw to the communities on the trail.
So in that scenario, how do you get from the end of the dam over to, because the tunnel is on the other side of the road from the
Right.
end of the dam,
Yeah,
right?
so
So how does
I
that,
should have brought that picture for you today. So we actually measured the distance coming out of the tunnel between the, not even the end of the tunnel, but the end of the abutments
Yeah.
that are close to the tunnel entrance to the street. And there's 52 feet until you get to the last abutment, and then that's another 14 feet. So there's a lot of room to put a ramp on that side of the road, on Route 70. And we did do a mock-up of what it might look like. So you'd do a ramp on that side, you'd have to have a crossing on Route 70, and then you would either go uphill and cross the dam if we're allowed to do that at some point, or you would go downhill to the existing trail.
yeah, it's the crossing on 70 that like, we're not talking about putting something over 70, we're
Well,
just like,
so not in this phase.
Okay.
So once we complete this acquisition, so in this phase, there will actually be several steps. So one would be completing this, the review ahead of actually making the acquisition. And then once we do the initial acquisition, one of the first steps will likely be securing the tunnel, depending on the status of it, because we don't want people going through the tunnel and then dropping down into nothing if they're, going at any kind of speed. And then the next phase would be to then get some ideas about what the best mechanism is to repair the tunnel and to cross. So our idea is to do that as a single project where we might do something like work with engineering schools and make it a contest for the person to come up with the best proposal, and determine from those some other ideas on what's the safest way for that crossing.
right, because either way, they have to cross the road at some point. They're either crossing it up there or they're crossing it down.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And I think, from the point of view of the way it's on a hill, you want to make sure there's good line of sight if you're crossing at grade level.
Okay.
But excellent questions. I think I shared an initial budget with you in the last time I met, so we've changed that a little bit because we didn't get the grant for the tunnel. So the funds that we'll have to put forward in this phase will actually include the tunnel inspection and the Phase 1 environmental review. And then in the bottom part of that budget, it shows you the acquisition price, estimated closing costs, and the total. The Mass Trails Group suggested if we're applying for one of their grants that we not include the appraisal as part of our grant application. So the appraisal for the property would be another cost for the Clinton Greenway Conservation Trust. And because of the type of property it is, it's a fairly hefty price tag for that kind of an appraisal. They have to look at all the property owners on both sides of the trail, and since it's a long linear thing, it typically is a high-priced appraisal. So we'll definitely look around for the best prices on that, but an initial estimate I got was in the 10K range. We now have to raise more money, which is part of the reason that I wanted to be here. So right now, the way we've estimated the budget for this phase of the project, the CGCT would need to have a little over 60K in funds to complete it. Our overall fundraising goal for the trail development is 150K, and that's primarily because on many of the grants, because it's on a reimbursement basis, we need to have upfront money to do various aspects of development on the trail. So when we get to the next phase and we want to do, some more actual building on the trail, we need to have money up front. So that's our overall fundraising goal. And to that end, we are working on some fundraising activities, one of which is coming up very soon, which is our chili cook-off. And we actually have several entries, so we're pretty excited about that, and the tickets are selling very well. So the event will be, several people will have their chili in the contest. Everyone who attends the event will get to taste all the chilies, and the people who attend the event vote on the chili. So you pick your favorite chili, and then we'll have other activities during the event, such as 50-50 raffle. We'll also have a silent auction. We'll have some games for kids to keep them entertained. And we are offering some non-chili options because we know not everybody likes chili. So we'll also have macaroni and cheese and salad, and then we'll have a bake sale as well. So that's the next, that's planned for November 16th at the Alps, and tickets are on sale now. You can get more information at our website, clintongreenway.com, and or call me directly. We've got posters and flyers, hopefully all over town. I hope you've seen them already. We did do a mailing to our mailing list, as well as we've solicited businesses for sponsorship of the event. The next fundraiser that we're thinking about doing is a breakfast, which we would do in the spring, and that would have a little bit more of a business focus. So the idea would be that Mr. Connolly, as the chair of the select board, purchases a table for the select board and the rest of the town employees that work with the select board, and then at the event, he's the waiter for his table, and you tip him. So if he's a good waiter, you give him a good tip, and that's how we raise funds. So that's the idea that we're trying to, flesh out for a spring fundraiser. So we hope it's something that all of you will support. I think it would be great to see a little competition between some of the town offices. And I did, by the way, challenge the police department and the fire department as to who has the best chili. I haven't seen an entry from either department yet, so hoping that we see some of them at the event. Related to, I covered a lot, and some of you didn't have as much background on the project, so I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Are there any questions?
No, I would just suggest that every selectman should buy a table.
Well, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah,
That's a better idea.
That's more tables.
Well, I'd like to sit at your table so you could wait on me.
In my next life, I'm going to be a fundraiser. See, I seem to have a
You
talent
do, you
for
have a
that.
knack for it.
I have a knack for it.
You do, indeed. Indeed. But I think it would be a fun idea, and we do it, it would be more of like a 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. kind of event where people can go before work. So hopefully local businesses would participate, so that's the general idea.
Well, Fran, if there's no questions, I want to thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you.
This has been a long haul.
It has been.
But
It has been.
You can almost, you can see that we're coming, not to the end, but to a really good benchmark.
We're making progress, so that's really good. For a long time, it felt like 2 steps forward, or 1 step forward, 2 steps back, but we seem to be moving forward now, so
Thank you.
very encouraging. Thanks very much for your support.
You're welcome. It's still public comment. Is there any other public comment? Okay, next item on the agenda is a review of minutes for October 16th. What's the pleasure of the board?
I wasn't at the second meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we accept the minutes for October 16th as presented.
Second?
Any discussion? There being none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Next up is administrative business, water, sewer, trash abatements in the amount of $2,196.60.
Do you want to do the second minutes? Mr. Chair,
Yes.
do you want to cover this? There's a second minutes from that October 25th meeting. Do you want to accept those while we're on it?
Oh, it's not on the agenda.
Oh, sorry, it's in the packet. I wasn't there, so it's the only thing. Do you want to wait on that?
The minutes
From
for,
the 25th for that one-day liquor license?
The short meeting.
I'm looking at it here.
they have it in the package, but we don't have it on the agenda,
So that's fine.
so we're going
My
to
bad.
move right along.
Oh, they can approve those,
Even though they're not on the agenda?
yeah, just minutes. Yeah, just accepting minutes.
What's the pleasure of the board on
Yeah, it's my old.
October 25th, minutes of the Selectmen's meeting?
I make a motion, we approve the minutes for, what was the date again? 15th?
No.
No,
October 25th.
October 25th.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I'll be abstaining. I wasn't at that meeting.
It was a very brief, just for the record, it was a very brief meeting, just called to authorize a one-day liquor license. Is there any other discussion? There being none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, unanimous. Three in favor,
Yeah, I should abstain too. 'cause
and
I
two
wasn't there.
abstentions.
Two
Yeah.
abstentions. Thank you.
Administrative business, water, sewer, trash abatements in the amount of $2,196.60. What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chair, I move that we authorize the water sewer trash abatements for the amount of $2,196.60.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? There being none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous? Next item is raffle permit for Clinton Greenway Conservation Trust. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the raffle permit for the Clinton Greenway Conservation Trust.
Second.
Any discussion? There being none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Old and new business, federal law enforcement fund transfer. The police chief is requesting approval to transfer $33,000 from the federal law enforcement fund to the state law enforcement fund to be used for a vehicle purchase and evidence for investigations.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the request from the police department to transfer $33,000 from the federal law enforcement fund for the following: $28,000 to purchase unmarked drug detective vehicle and $5,000 to purchase evidence and equipment, information.
Second.
Any discussion? There being none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Town Hall Use Charity Event Fee. The Town Hall Use Committee would like to discuss a request for reduction of the use fee for a charity event at the Clinton Town Hall Fallon Auditorium.
So me and Joyce met with the applicant. So they requested anything we can do to help out the event. So it's a charity event. The proceeds from the event are going to a Clinton charity, going to the Clinton Wheat offices. So I am recommending that obviously the custodial fee is non-negotiable, but I'm recommending that we cut the fee for the application fee down to $100 for the event, considering that it's a charitable event and the proceeds are going to a Clinton charity.
Can I consider that a motion?
Yes, that would be a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? There being none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Next item is the notice of state surplus of Clinton Armory property. The Mass Division of Capital Asset Management has sent notice of availability of state-owned property in Clinton, the former Clinton Armory building. The town of Clinton has until 11/22/19 to respond with their recommendations for the use of this property.
When did we get this? October 21st?
It's a month.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's something we should look into, but not run into. We don't need another way to open, but something we should look into.
I agree with Mr. Busno. I mean, I think we should at least look at it. It's too bad that we're sort of up against it. Is there a possibility that we can look at the building?
Sure. Yeah.
in time to have a subsequent meeting, and, okay?
Because where are we now, Michael? Well, do we have to, by November 22nd, we have to tell them, yes, we're interested in it, or no, we're not?
I think it's just giving them some type of feedback. Yeah, I think if we say we're interested, that we can get more time to look into it.
Uh-huh. So if we told them we're interested, we wouldn't have to, we're not committed to anything.
Right.
Well, we couldn't be committed to anything without
Right,
town
yeah,
meeting
right. We wouldn't
approval
be.
anyway.
Yeah. They would just go on to the next step of their process, that's all. So,
Uh-huh.
but if the board wanted a tour, we could set that up. I'm trying to, next week, we have a emergency planning committee, which a number of departments go to that. We meet a couple times a year, just internally to do emergency preparedness. And I thought if, any other department wanted to look at it as well, if we could have everyone together that day, or maybe we meet at the police station, so we could just go across the street and have departments look at it. And if the board members, wanted to go through, we could see if we could set up a time for board members to go through as well too, so.
Why don't we try to coordinate it?
I think it'd be worth to take a look at it.
Why don't we try to coordinate it all at once, so there's not 3 different times that we're asking them to open the building for us?
So we could maybe do something later that day.
What day is that, Michael?
That one's next Wednesday, the 16th, the 13th in the morning, but maybe we could do something in the afternoon if it'd be easier for the board members and know what work commitments and stuff.
I'm okay. I don't want to,
We can go in the morning, whatever.
everybody else?
I'm okay Wednesday morning.
I'm okay. Is requesting an extension out of the question, or is this date non-negotiable? Because it is, I think we'll have enough time to get down there and take a tour, but I do feel a little rushed. It's already the 6th, and they want to know by the 22nd.
Yeah, I think this is just their process, and then they would just move on. They offer state agencies, the local town, and then other nonprofits. They just kind of go through a process. So I'm sure if the town says, hey, we have some interest here and we need more time, that would be fine.
Okay.
I don't think they're trying to rush the process. They just have a list that they have to go through, certain steps that they have to go through. So, most of the time, people aren't interested, so it just moves on to the next step, But certainly, the state isn't lightning speed on,
Right.
on things, so if we need time, I'm sure that's fine. But when I
Or if-
call them to set this up next week, I'll find out more about the process.
And, not to preemptively say we want to do something. We could tell the state that we're seriously considering it, just to buy us enough time to develop a comprehension of what we're getting into and what its potential is. And
Right.
we need to involve the community to find out what community interest is in it, and all the other town boards and committees and departments might have input. We ought to send the same notice out to them so they can give their feedback to us.
Right. No, exactly, and I think the state is, is sensitive to that. I don't think they expect us to come up with a plan and and I know it, their date was the 21st, but we didn't get it the 21st. I think it only came like last week or so.
Right.
So I think it's just the process they go through, and that, we just need to say, and their form, to whether or not we're interested is very simple. We just check on the box, we're interested, we're not interested, So I think if we express interest, and we instead of going down this path, we now go down another path on the surplus process,
So we could schedule a walkthrough of the facility, just to have a knowledge base of what is really there.
Right.
And at a subsequent meeting, we can at least discuss what we've heard from the community, and if there's any reason at all to indicate that we're interested, we could vote that we're interested, and it's no harm, no foul. We're not bound by anything.
Exactly, yeah, and there would be another board meeting before this is due back to the state.
Right.
Can we just request that whoever does the tour is somewhat knowledgeable about the building and its recent history and any, like, deficiencies that it might have. I just would like to have somebody, if possible, guide us on the tour, something more than just opening the doors and having us just look around without knowing. I think it's a reasonable request, and it just shows that we're kind of serious about taking a look at the property. I just think it makes sense if we're going to do a tour, that the person doing the tour is somewhat knowledgeable about the building. That's all. Just more than someone that's just going to open the door and let us in and let us walk around.
I'm sure if we actually vote to pursue it and we develop a plan to use, what we would actually do with the building if we had it, there'll be an awful lot of time available to do our due diligence and get for lack of a better, a home inspection, for lack of a better description,
Sure.
an engineer's report on the building if we're seriously going to go forward with it, because we shouldn't make an effort to acquire it no matter what idea we have for it without understanding the costs involved with upgrading it, renovating it, and keeping it running.
Yep. Agreed. It would probably make sense for Russ to be a bit available for that tour as well, right?
I believe as of now, the building inspector and the facilities manager is going to be there Wednesday.
Perfect.
Okay?
So Michael, you'll send around an email as to the time of the meeting?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Next up is Human Resources Manager Search Update. Michael?
I know some of the board members were interested, not sure where I last talked to the board about this issue, but there was a candidate that we were pursuing. That candidate dropped out of the race, so myself and the superintendent of schools met and kind of decided next steps. We talked about wanting to do a re-advertisement process one more time, kind of as is, with maybe better clarification to what the position entails. And we're meeting again on next Tuesday to finalize that marketing strategy of where we're going to try to focus on who we're trying to recruit. So, we're trying to get at more of the trade associations and the actual people that would be in the job that we're looking at, where before I think it was more of a generalized advertisement. So now we're going to try to kind of pinpoint the personnel that we're hoping to bring on. So, I talked a little bit with the personnel board about it, with the superintendent, and we have to map out a strategy to try to find the right person. So,
Is there any consideration to combining the search with also a solicitation of a consultant or a human resources company to either support the town in the interim of getting somebody, or to support the successful candidate if the need was there?
I think we've talked about that model, but in terms of, you're saying of having them help do the search, or?
No, and
After.
and assisting the town in its current human resources issues, and/or supporting the new person if or when that person comes on board.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll talk to the superintendent. We did talk about maybe having a firm that would be on to support a new hire, but we didn't think of that, about having someone do
Someone get familiar with where we are and where we need to be, and
Right.
and have a program or a suggestion list for the new person when they come on board. So
Put some
they're
pieces in place before somebody gets hired. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, that's an idea too.
The job might seem a little less daunting if
Right.
we go that route first and try to lay ground. I just think it's a good idea. I don't know how that would, if we could include that with the interviews, so, we would have so many interviews for the position, but then also an interview with like a representative from one of those consulting companies.
Explain to them what we're doing and where we're at, and it could take us another 6 months before we had a candidate, and that candidate would be stepping into this vacuum that we have here. Maybe we could approach it from both angles, get a consultant on board to start evaluating what our most stressful needs are, what we need to do, or what this person would need to do first, second, third, fourth, on down the list. It's just something we
Yeah,
should
that's a
be
good idea.
considering and evaluating.
I also have a question in regards to the salary. Is there, to your knowledge, is there any documentation or any rationale or any type of report that was provided that justified why the salary range was decided as what it was?
I don't recall what we were given. I'd have to pull up the file. That was done, the consultant that did the salary study put together that separately, not as part of the group, but they did as a separate step, knowing we were going to look to that position. But I don't remember whether it was a report or just a couple of page thing, or just a job description with salary range.
Yeah.
Where they compared towns. So let me try to see what I have on that.
Yeah, I just,
It's
because
been a while.
we might do the second round of job searches and get a lot of applicants and not have a problem again, but going through a round and coming up with nothing is an indication that maybe our salary might be out of whack with what the market is dictating. I'm not saying that it is, but it's just an indicator in that direction. So I don't know if it might be worth taking a second look at comparable positions and salaries. I know that there are resources available to try to help with that, and I'd just be curious to see if our salary is in line with is comparable with what the market is handing out to positions of that magnitude.
Anyone else?
No.
Next item on our agenda is a donation request. The Clinton Greenway Conservation Trust is requesting a donation from the Civic Fund to be a sponsor of their event on 11/16/19, raising funds for the development of the rail trail. What's the pleasure of the board? Michael, I don't think we've donated to this particular interest in the past, correct?
I don't believe so, not that I remember.
Is there?
Do we have a standard number for these things? I know
Well, I'm
Yeah,
just
or
looking to see if there's a fee to be a sponsor. There's asking us to be a sponsor, which I think we should be. I'll make a motion that we grant them $200.
Second.
Any discussion? There being none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous? Subcommittee reports, or committee reports. First up is Government Affairs Subcommittee. I believe we handed out a list of the boards or commissions that will be subject to this board's appointment process. And while we have names of people who are currently filling those positions, what the subcommittee, Michael? I thought we were going to have the second column with the proposed terms.
Thought we were going to do that the next,
No.
No, we were going to do the appointments suggestion at the next meeting. All right, well, then, at our next meeting, we will have, okay, what field is this? Oh, this is, no, all right. What we will present to you at our next meeting is this, basically the same list with the proposed expiration terms of future appointments, starting with when we make these appointments. Because what we found is that over the years, people have been appointed to 3-year terms when the boards and commissions should have 5-year terms, and that people were appointed to positions for either 3 or 5 years, but they were filling unexpired terms. And over the years, this thing has become very confusing. It's supposed to be like for Fuller Field Commission, this, by the statute, there's supposed to be one every year, and they're supposed to be for 5 years. So we'll have a list of suggested expiration date, future expiration dates, so that they're in sync with that legislation, and the same thing with most of the other boards and commissions. We would have, like, for Conservation Commission, I'm just picking it randomly, they're 3-year terms, right, Mike?
Right.
And there should be 2 people, 1 person, and then 2 people for Concom, so there's a cycle on 3 years.
Exactly.
And the same thing for most of them, other than ZBA, I believe, is 5-year terms.
Right.
And we don't want them all in 1 year, or 5 in 1 year and 1 another year. So we need to get back on track of where they should be. So we'll have that list at the next meeting to set the terms for these various boards and commissions. Does everyone understand
Yes.
what we're proposing? Okay. That's all for tonight from Government Affairs.
Mr. Chair, while we're on Conservation Commission, did we resolve that confusion? Okay. They're okay.
Meeting tomorrow night.
Fantastic.
And Mr. Chairman, the Downtown Renovation Committee, there has been some mention on Facebook, but the town did receive 1.5 Mass Works grant for the downtown project, which basically saves the town $1.5 million. The way it was funded, I believe, is $3 million from the landfill enterprise account. And, or what is that, the name of that account?
Yeah, the
I think it's capital expenditures.
fund.
Capital expenditures account.
Infrastructure.
And we're going to borrow $1.5 million. The Finance Committee did that, hoping that we'd be able to get the MassWorks grant. So we did get the MassWorks grant, and certainly that has been very much a team effort. But we really have to congratulate our Director of Community and Economic Development. He really did a good job, and that money's going to come in handy. And that project is moving forward.
Again, I'd like to thank the state officials and town officials. Representative Naughton brought the check. But as Mike said, I want to thank Mike for his work on this. It was on his initiative that we started this whole process with the idea of adding decorative lighting or seasonal decorations down on High Street.
$4.5 million later.
And government being what it is, it's grown from decorations to lights to new poles to new wires and then new roads and new sidewalks. And it is how government works, but I want to thank Michael for his initiative for getting this thing started, and Mr. Duffy for his efforts on acquiring the grant, which basically takes most of the cost of this $4.5 million project off the backs of the property taxpayers in Clinton, and it's funded by this grant and by the enterprise fund from the landfill. So I want to thank those 2 people especially, and Hank Naughton and Mike Ward, and anyone else that had a role to play in getting this grant.
Mr. Chair, just further context and update on the project itself. We had a public hearing a week ago, this past Monday, and it was a terrific turnout. I'm going to guess it was maybe 30 or 40 business owners and landlords came out to look at the plans and talk to the engineers and talk to Phil Duffy and ask questions, everything from snow removal to curb cuts and crosswalks. So it was terrific to see that kind of interest and, if maybe guarded optimism, enthusiasm. But it's, I think it bodes well for moving forward, that everyone's very interested in what we're doing there and how it's going to make downtown better.
And, I should have mentioned, because just as Mr. Kerrigan started speaking, I realized that we hadn't met since the last committee meeting. And at that public hearing, there were a number of suggestions made by the merchants and some of the landlords downtown. And we met last Wednesday and went over all of those suggestions and have agreed. I think we've tentatively agreed to do some, and we'll go back to some of the merchants with some others, and probably we'll be doing some modifications to the plan based on the input from the merchants. So it's moving along, and things seem to be going well so far.
Well, I didn't mean to leave Sean off that list of town officials who have worked
Johnny come lately on this one, so.
very hard to bring this project forward.
I just want to say, not that I took umbrage at what you had to say, but having worked in government my whole life, I can't imagine that sometimes in the private sector, somebody will say, well, let's do this, and they discover to do this, it's going to be a bigger project than one thought. What got this project going was, let's get some lights up downtown, and we discovered that was impossible with the present electric and light infrastructure. Looked at the fact that those light poles are 50 years old, half of them don't light. Said, let's put up, we got to put up new light poles. Well, that means you have to dig holes in the sidewalks, you have to replace the wiring. Well, if we're going to do the sidewalks, we might as
And
well do the
trees.
roads.
And trees, too.
Trees, yeah, don't worry, there's going to be trees.
Oh, yes.
A lot of trees. So anyway, but I think it will be a huge boost to the downtown, and I'm looking forward to its completion.
I think it's going to be a great thing for generations of Clinton.
Yeah, at least we can have the Christmas lights back.
Yes. Okay. Anything else under subcommittee reports?
Mr. Chair, go ahead.
Well, I was able to, the town hall usage subcommittee met, and the only thing that really came out of that meeting was, I'm going to make a proposal or a motion that we freeze any future requests for banquet use of the town hall, because there's been some very large disagreements between the custodial staff and the people using the town hall for banquet purposes in regard to expectations. So I would request that we freeze any future banquet requests until we get a new policy that is more detailed in front of the Board of Selectmen for approval.
And your subcommittee will be preparing that policy
Correct.
change.
Yes,
Is that a motion?
that is a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? There being none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Any others? Sean, you had something?
Mr. Chair, yeah, the cable committee met before this meeting, and we're hopefully, we've sent Comcast our latest take on the contract. We're cautiously optimistic that we'll have something back in time to recommend it for the full board's consideration at our next meeting, but certainly soon thereafter. We're in the last phases of that. This is not exactly a subcommittee, but it was under goals and objectives. Mr. Jakonski and I met with the DPW superintendent on the 21st to talk about the board's emphasis on downtown snow removal. As we all know, there are many challenges, but I think we came to a decent first pass at what we'd like the goal to be. There are challenges with cost and manpower, where to put it. These are all things that it's kind of a moving target that we're going to have to figure out. But the plan right now is to look at, it's almost the same footprint as the downtown project. High and Church from Walnut to Nelson, to make sure the crosswalks are clear and the big piles are taken out during small storms. And as the big storms happen, we take more out. So it's going to be the first year for this, so we're going to have to take a look at how it goes, but Chris is on board, and I think the board is too. So between that and working with the facilities department to make sure the town-on properties are clear, we're hoping to set a good example, as we've covered before. As far as getting word out, there's a plan to get a mailer out in the next water bill that Chris and his team was working on. And also, he was considering, since there's been some confusion in the past with the new parking ban being limited to just snow events instead of November to April, there's been consideration to putting up lights at major intersections. So if there's a flashing blue light, that's when the parking restriction is on. So as soon as we get that finalized, certainly before snow season, we will share that with the people. But I think it was a great meeting and a good first step moving forward. If I could, one last thing, I'm just having flashbacks to subcommittees past. I believe our annual tax classification hearing is on December 4th this year, if we're sticking to the first Wednesday in December. I just want to make sure that the public knows it. There was some concern last year that it wasn't properly advertised. So if you're interested in how we set the property tax rates, Mr. Barrett always does a very thorough, if dense, presentation. So please come on out or watch on TV. And I would strongly encourage the two new members to talk to Mr. Barrett if they're interested in information ahead of time. It is a bit, as I said, dense, but I consider it one of the most important votes that we make. So be prepared.
Thank you, Sean. Anyone else on the subcommittee reports? Is there any discussion on their goals and objectives? I think we touched on some of it.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any comments on any of the goals and objectives as they stand?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. There's two things in regards to the facilities resource planning. I was wondering if, Mike, if you could talk with our facilities director and find out how long I think it would take him to put together a presentation for the board that would list all the major projects that he sees on the horizon, a priority list of those projects, resources allocated to those, and timelines. Obviously, everything being tentative and an estimate, but I think it's time to start holistically looking at some of the bigger issues townwide and where Russ sees them in his priority list, and how many resources he thinks are available, so he can start to identify if he thinks that there's issues with some of those, and again, just a tentative timeline for those projects. And secondly, if in that same vein, if you could find out how long it would take Russ to come up with a town-wide office strategy plan, because right now we're already we're running out of office space at the town hall right now. I know Elliston doesn't really have an office. We're looking at hiring a human resources position. So clearly office space needs to be considered. I would just ask in that assessment that Russ just consider all town buildings, and I don't know if we should formally go to a school committee meeting just to explain to them the intention of this, because I would like Russ to have the flexibility to just consider the school central office building and a potentially renovated fire station. I understand both of those buildings are under the school committee jurisdiction, but just for the sake of efficiency, I'd like Russ to have that flexibility to at least put a plan together, and we can let the school committee know that Russ is at least just putting an idea together for it. Obviously, nothing binding, but I think if we're serious about efficiently using the space in town, then that office building and a possibly future renovated fire station needs to be part of the equation.
I don't think we need to, other than just inform the superintendent of schools of what you're asking. Russ works equally for the municipal side and the school department, and he's in communication with the superintendent on a regular basis, so, and I'm sure they would be open to at least evaluation of those facilities.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mike, can you convey that to Russ? And as far as, basically, you were the first part of your request
Sure.
was talking about almost capital planning for the upcoming year, because basically, projects are already committed, they're in the budget. Russ is working within the constraints of what he has, but for budget season, he'll be providing us with a capital planning list of projects that he sees, not just next year, but 5 years out into the forecast,
Okay.
so that we have, that's part of what you were asking for, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Not just for next year or what's ongoing right now, but a more comprehensive plan for the future.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else on goals, objectives, or subcommittees? Being nothing, we don't do general correspondence, right?
No.
All right, well then, is there any other old or new business? Any?
I have one more thing, Mr. Chair. A number of meetings ago, we had a proposal for a four-way stop sign at Church Street and Chestnut, and we left it that we're going to explore alternate options. I'm just curious, I just haven't heard anything. That was about, I think, 5 or 6 meetings ago. So I'd just be curious where we stand on that. If there are no alternate suggestions at this point, I'd like to bring that back to the Board of Selectmen for the next meeting, if possible. Or unless there's some other reason why why it hasn't been brought up again.
It was recommended by the traffic committee, I believe.
Traffic committee should meet to discuss it.
Traffic committee did discuss it and rejected it.
Oh, I thought they discussed it, I thought the traffic committee proposed it.
No,
Oh,
the traffic, correct me if I'm wrong.
Traffic committee
The
did,
four-way stop,
they recommended it.
In the past, they had
Oh, wait a minute.
rejected it a couple times, and then recently they said, well, we could give it a try.
okay.
Then some of the affected neighbors had asked if they could come up with some other options,
So where are we with that? So he's right.
So-
I mean, the traffic committee did say, well, maybe we should go ahead.
Yes.
But then some neighbors said, well, we're not in favor of that, so we need to do something.
Yeah, so I think
Oh.
the traffic committee should meet again and come up with some other discussion.
Okay, well,
And I'd like the traffic committee, when it meets and discusses this issue, to be able to present to the Board of Selectmen with its recommendation, the rationale behind doing that, the hard data that says that's what we need to do with that intersection. And in that conversation, I'd also like them to consider, if we're going to have another four-way stop in the area, maybe it should be at Union Street by the police station rather than at that intersection, to slow down the traffic coming from that end of town, as opposed to doing it at Chestnut Street. At Chestnut and Church.
I do think some of the concern is tied specifically to the, to the senior citizen center, right there. So there might be some advantage to doing it at the other intersection, but I just know that's one of the reasons why that intersection is preferred, aside from it just, well, they'll be able to talk to it in more detail. I'm sure they've talked about it a lot in their subcommittee, so I agree. They should come and present their recommendation with rationale as to,
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it is a two-way stop right now.
Yes.
So we're talking about adding a stop on Chestnut Street.
correct.
And from my anecdotal, personal experience, it's much more difficult to get out of Union Street onto Chestnut Street than it is to get out at Church Street. And I would say, if we're going to add another stop, I would like the board to consider putting the stop there at Union Street. It would slow down traffic as it approached Senior Citizen Center because they had to stop at Union Street. So I would just like to know the hard statistical reasons of why that intersection needs another stop sign.
Yeah, I agree. I can only say anecdotally, I have similar thoughts of the other intersection driving up onto Chestnut Street. The cars coming from the left is just my experience, but I hold my breath every time I try to drive into Chestnut Street or take a right, especially if there's cars parked on the side of the street that you can't see the cars coming from the left. But yeah, I'd just be interested to hear what they have to say.
Okay? Anything else? Anyone? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Any discussion? There being none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. See you in,
Go over an hour. Okay.
see you in 2 weeks.